Welcome to the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. On this podcast, I interview people who work behind the scenes of theater to create all of the onstage magic that you see. Today is my conversation with technical director Adriane Heflin. Adriane works in the Twin Cities area up in Minnesota. I live in Kansas City right now, but for 2 years I lived in a suburb of St. Paul, so I know that area pretty well. And so we start off our conversation talking about Minnesota winter and all of the courage that it requires to live in Minnesota during the winter. I really enjoy talking to technical directors because it's a world I'm not terribly familiar with. As a musician, sometimes that I'll know who the technical director is. Like especially if we're on a platform or underneath something, usually the technical director will pop over to say hi to the musicians or make sure that things are going well with the platform. But usually I don't have much interaction with technical directors, and so I enjoy getting to talk to them and to hear about their world and what things they do behind the scenes. I'm so excited to share with you my conversation with Adriane Heflin. Are you in like Minneapolis? Or are you in one of the suburbs?
So I'm in one of the suburbs. I live in Robbinsdale, which is like a little northwest of the city, not too far. We've lived here 20 years in this house, which is kind of crazy.
So I lived in Minnesota in that area for about 2 years. I lived in Roseville, so like more towards like the St. Paul area.
Yeah.
I moved there to teach at like teach adjunct at a small liberal arts college, and I only made it 2 years because of the winter, mostly because of the winters. Like I just couldn't.
It's not for the faint of heart.
I moved in August, and in September people were like, "What is your coat situation? Like, what are you prepared for winter?" And I was like, I don't know. What coat do I need to have?"
Right, there's like the 40 to 50 degree coat. There's the 20 to 40 degree coat. There's the 0 to 20, and then there's the 20 below.
Yeah. And you use that coat a lot, unfortunately.
Yes. I'm not a native Minnesotan. I did not grow up here, but I have found that I'm actually like a cold weather person. So I'm lucky. I would rather be cold than hot. I guess I can manage it.
Yeah, I can't imagine 20 winters. Right before I moved, it was like May 1st, and I was just so done. I was done with winter. I was done with like wheezing all the time because of the cold. And on May 1st, it started snowing, and it snowed 1.5 feet of snow. And I just stood at my window and just like sobbed. I was like, I can't take this anymore.
I'm done. I'm just done. Yep.
So I admire people who can stick it out for that long and handle 9 months of winter every year.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's definitely a thing. You got to know that. It's funny. It's not the cold that actually I mind. It's the dark.
Ooh,
it's it's dark. Like you go to work and it's dark, and you come out of work at even 4:30 and it's dark.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm grateful for the summer when it's still light at 10 o'clock. And
great. So let's start. Well, we were kind of already started, but you mentioned you weren't from you weren't from Minnesota. So take us through where you are from and how you got to Minnesota.
Yeah. So I'm actually from New York. I grew up on Long Island in a town called Great Neck, which is just right outside of the city. And I lived there as a child my whole life. I was really lucky that my parents valued the arts and experiences. And I have an older sister, and she did the school play and elementary school. I'm sure I saw that, and so I was like, well, I want to try that, and so I always loved to kind of sing and dance around. I danced as a kid, and so and our parents, they took us to see Broadway shows and Lincoln Center and the Nutcracker at the Lincoln Center, and museums, all the fantastic museums in New York City. And they showed us and introduced us to kind of all of these cultural things. And I love to draw and paint and craft and stuff. But I really liked theater, and I was lucky. My parents sent me on the summers to a theater camp in the Berkshires called Belvoir Terrace. And we did a bunch of shows every summer, and I kind of did that all growing up. But at the same time, I really liked art and creating things. And I remember, this is so dorky, but I remember when I was in fifth grade, they had these little like mini classes to kind of get us ready for taking electives in middle school and high school. And they had one that was a mechanical drawing class. And I took that one. And I am not an artist. Like, I can't draw a tree or a portrait or I'm not good at drawing realistic things. And that was always frustrating for me. And in this mechanical drawing class, they taught us how to draw little like isometric shapes, like a little cube or a block. And for the first time with a pencil and a ruler, I could draw something that looked three-dimensional. It looked real, you know? And I was blown away. I was so excited. And I thought that was part of architecture. So I started to get into architecture and I learned about buildings and building things. And so I kind of did these two things, like theater and architecture, independently for a really long time. I just didn't know how to combine them. And when I got into high school, even I was in the shows, but I helped build the sets. And we just had this one guy, Neil, I think his name was, who did all the technological stuff, like all the lighting and scenery and design. And even living so close to New York and Broadway and having access to all of that stuff, it never occurred to me that like somebody does that for all those shows and that's their job. There's so much emphasis placed on the actor and maybe the director that like that's all you kind of are exposed to, I think, a lot when you're younger. And so when I went to college, I was like, okay, well, I'm certainly not an actor. That's that's not good. You don't want to see me do that. So I'll be an architect. And I applied to colleges for architecture, and I got into Washington University in St. Louis. And I was very ready to leave New York. I was kind of done with the attitude and some of the people there. It was like not kind of who I was never one of the cool kids. And so I was very excited to leave. And so I went to St. Louis. I went to WashU, and I got on the School of Architecture, and I was super psyched. And my freshman year, I did no theater, and I was really unhappy, and I didn't know why. And between freshman and sophomore year, I had the opportunity to study abroad with a language program. I had taken Italian as a freshman, and I loved it. And there was a class where you could go to Italy for 6 weeks with the university, and it was like an immersion program, and we got to travel on the weekends. It was fantastic. And you could get college credit for it. And again, I'm so grateful my parents, gave me that opportunity. And on the trip, there were like, I don't know, 16 or 18 of us students from WashU, and like 3 or 4 of them were involved in the performing arts department, which we called the PAD, right? Performing arts department. And so there was a lot of talk of like theater this, theater this, theater that, theater that. And I was like, oh man, like no wonder I'm so sad. I miss this. I miss this part of what I was doing. And so when I went back to school, I did all my architecture stuff, but I also took acting one and intro to backstage, because they were like the prereqs to everything else at WashU in the theater department. And in that backstage theater class, I learned about the position of the technical director, which is the marriage of theater and architecture. And I was like, that's it. That is it. That's what I want to do. And I talked to my parents, and I was like, look, this is what I want to do. And I'm really, grateful. My parents were super supportive, and I switched from the architecture school to liberal arts, and I kind of never looked back. So I was in college, and I did, I took all the tech classes, and I did some lighting too. I liked lighting, but I liked building stuff. I liked making stuff. I went to summer stock because that's what they told me to do. So I spent some summers doing some summer stock. I was an intern at Williamstown Theater Festival in the late 90s. And that was a crazy experience. What else? I went to Stages St. Louis. I was a carpenter there. Opera Theater St. Louis. I was on their changeover crew. And again, just sort of seeing different things and learning different things. And I knew that I wanted to be in charge. Like, I was not a good enough carpenter to make that my living, I knew I wanted to be in the shop and do the scenery, but I felt like I was a better organizer. And I knew when I graduated college, I was like so green. I was greener than the trees. Like I still had so much to learn. And so I knew that I wasn't going to get a job as a manager anywhere. And so I was like, I should go to grad school. I'm a good student. I should go to grad school. And I looked at a bunch of programs, and I got into Yale. I remember going to USITT that year and like interviewing with a bunch of people and just, being really overwhelmed. But everyone was like, well, Yale is the best. And so I went for it and I got in. And so I went to the technical design production program there, 96 to 99. There were 10 people in my class. Of the 10, I was the only person who had come like straight out of undergrad. Everyone had taken time off and worked. And so I felt pretty young and pretty inexperienced. Um, and I was the only woman. And that was also like a real culture shock. There were other women who kind of were doing this stuff at my college, but certainly not in grad school. And that was certainly the first taste of like, oh, you are different um, than a lot of people in this chosen field. But Yale was amazing. I mean, it was a great experience, and it wasn't until I got to Yale that I really started to understand what kind of TD I wanted to be, and not even until probably my second year. Listen, I grew up in New York, right? Like I grew up seeing Broadway theater. I thought, oh God, I'm going to work on Broadway. I'm going to, be in my 20s and live in the Village and work at some Broadway theater. Like I was so clueless. I was so naive about how the world really works. And I learned more what Broadway was. Broadway's commercial theater. And what I actually really liked was regional theater. I wanted to get into a place where I could work with a company of people and establish rapport and have a season, as a home, a theatrical home. And so when I figured that out, that kind of changed, where I started to look. And when I graduated, I still knew like I knew more, but I certainly didn't know a whole lot. And I specifically applied for assistant technical director positions at big theaters, but because I knew that I wanted to learn from someone. I wanted to still be mentored, and that's how I ended up here in Minnesota. So I kind of was, when I was graduating, there were a couple ATD positions open in some big theaters. I looked at the Old Globe and I looked at the Guthrie was one of the places. And it's funny because a good friend of mine who I had gone to college with, she had moved to the Twin Cities while I was in grad school. And I remember saying to her, like, Carrie, you moved to Minnesota. It's like officially the middle of nowhere. Like, what is there? There's like skating rinks and igloos and like, what theater is in Minnesota? Come on. That's like, again, like I was so naive. I was so young. And she's like, Adriane, there's tons of theater here. You should come. There's so much. And I was like, what theater's in Minnesota? She was, the Guthrie is here. And I was like, Carrie, the Guthrie is like one of the top 5 theaters in the country. They're going to hire some genius from Imagineering at Disney. They're not going to like hire me, and 6 months later, I was hired as an ATD at the Guthrie. Just goes to show you, you just don't know what's going to happen, right? And never hurts to reach for the stars. And so that's what brought me out here, and I've sort of been here ever since.
Mm-hmm. So you're not still at the Guthrie now, right?
Right. So I was at the Guthrie for 9 years, which was amazing. Originally, we were at the Vineland building, the original Guthrie. And actually, just after I had started there, or just before I had started there, pardon me, they had done some renovation in the theater itself, and they had moved the shop off-site to Malcolm Avenue. So we called it Malcolm. So the shop was off-site, and they had moved the prop shop upstairs into what had been the scene shop. And so we would go over there for like load-ins and techs and things, but my office was actually not at the theater proper. And I was there for 9 years, which included the bonding in bills and creation and building and moving into the new building now down on the river, which we moved into in 2006. Oh my God, that was an amazing experience. It's rare in your career you get to be a part of like a brand new $125 million 3-venue complex from the ground up, and really helping to create the shop, and learning about material flow and programming and all that kind of stuff, and just implementation, setting up a shop. And I'm actually pretty excited. Even to this day, the shop is pretty much laid out the way we did it when we moved in, which is cool. It shows like we actually picked something that worked. We did like Scene Shop the board game. Like we printed out big drawings of what the shop was going to be, and then we made little scale versions of all the tools and the steel racks and the shop tables and everything. And we pushed them around, to like, we asked the carpenters and stuff, like, what do you guys want? And, the paint space and it was amazing. And I'm so grateful for that experience. I learned a lot about just the way a shop works and flow. And so we had moved in, and we had been in the new building for about 1.5 years, and I was like super happy there. And I wasn't looking to leave, actually. But a friend of mine sent a message saying that, or oh, no, I'm sorry, it was someone at the Guthrie sent an email around saying like, oh, this person who works in the wig shop is leaving because her husband just got a job at Oregon Shakespeare Festival and they're moving. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And her husband was Bill Teasy, who is technical director at OSF now. And he was the technical director at Children's Theater. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. And a good friend of mine from grad school, a stage manager named Jenny Friend, she was the PSM at Children's. And so I called her and I was like, so what's up? Like, huh? Because I had been at the G for 9 years at that point, and I was really, I was ready to take a move and move up, and it is like super rare, right, in regional theater at least, that you can either move laterally or move up and stay in the same city, unless you're in like a super big city. But often there's like one regional theater, in your town, and so we're lucky here that in the Twin Cities there we've got a bunch of theaters, and so I was like, I don't know if I want to leave right now. I mean, the Guthrie it's the Guthrie, it's amazing, but I'm gonna like what if myself for the rest of my life if I don't explore this opportunity. And I didn't really know a lot about children's at the time. And I was, like 9 months pregnant with my first child. So great time to make a career move.
Yeah.
um, but I decided to interview because I was like, look, worst case scenario, I'll decide, you know what, cool place, not for me. I'll just stay here at the Guthrie. But when I went over and I met the people there and I learned about the work they do and the mission, I was really blown away. Ironically, actually, to, between the time I applied and had my interview and stuff, I had my child, my son, and I came back to work. And about a month, maybe 2 months after I got back from maternity leave, the technical director of the Guthrie, Jeff Denstead, very unfortunately, tragically passed away suddenly. And so all of a sudden, the technical director position was open at the Guthrie. And there were two ATDs at the G. There was me and there was another man named Craig Pettigrew, and we were, we shared an office. We were very much like the yin to each other's yang. We worked really well together, actually. And we were like, well, you know what? We should apply over here. So like we both applied for the TD position at the Guthrie, but I was offered the position at Children's first, and I decided that was the right move for me, and so I moved, and I've been at Children's Theater Company ever since. I just finished my 12th season, and I love it. I'm so happy, and I'm happy to stay there for a long time. Post pandemic, I can't wait to go back.
Yeah, I love that. Is there a big difference in like behind the scenes jobs between working at a children's theater company versus, like the Guthrie?
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, the Children's Theater Company is the largest children's theater in North America, certainly in the country. So pre-COVID, right, when everybody got hammered, CTC had a $12.5 million operating budget. So that actually puts us in the top 25 regional theaters in the country, like TYA or not, Theater for Young Audiences, right, TYA or not. So we're a pretty big theater regardless of who our audience is. And we do the same scale and scope of shows that they do at the Guthrie. And I know because I've been there. It's just that the people who sit in our audience is 8 instead of 80. To me, actually, it's super important that we do phenomenally stellar work there because for many, many, many students here and many children in the Twin Cities, over 250 million people, 250,000 people, pardon, quarter of a million people see a show at CTC every year. And say over 60,000 of them are kids who come with their schools. For many of those students, this is their first experience coming to a theater. And we have to get it right? Because we're the ones who are creating lifelong theater goers. We have to show them that this is a pretty amazing thing to engage with and that you want to do this for your whole life. We make it better because they're kids. We don't, say, oh, they're kids, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I love that. That's so great. So this is just conjecture, just based on like the friends that I see on Facebook who are technical directors. Is it pretty common for technical directors to kind of be at one theater for a long time as opposed to like designers who are working at different theaters and musicians, and is it pretty common in your technical world to for you guys to kind of pick a place and settle there?
I certainly think that's in the regional world. Yes, that's been my experience. I think that a lot of technical directors like to, like myself, like to kind of get in and figure out how a place works and then work in that. If you are at a regional theater, I should say, and this is, where the breadth of my experience comes from. You have a season, you have a staff that is the same, year after year. You kind of know what shows you're doing, and and you're hired as a full-time salaried person, so it's not like you have to go finding the next thing, because your job is full-time and it's a seasonal thing. I certainly know people who, they were at this place a couple years and then they moved up to a bigger place and they moved up to a bigger place and they moved up to, like that is certainly a thing too. And, certainly with summer stocks and whatnot, very often someone will be there a couple years and then they'll move up and someone else will come in. I think in regional theater, yeah, like historically, a lot of people they came in and then they sat there for a while, which is good and bad, right? It's good in that you get to develop relationships with other theaters. Maybe you're doing co-pros, or you're sending stuff around, and then there's institutional knowledge that's gained that helps the local, your institution. But it does make it hard for new people to break into this field. At least in the regional world, it's certainly made it challenging as we try to move the needle on EDI, of equity and diversity and inclusion, right? That like if people aren't leaving the jobs to be then filled by new people who look different, it's more difficult to move that needle.
Mm-hmm. I would love to talk to you about leadership. Like being in charge of like a shop full of men. Like as a bass player, I've been in situations where I'm in an orchestra and I'm the leader of the bass section, and they're all men. And sometimes it goes well, and sometimes it goes really badly.
Yep.
So, what have you learned about leadership? And you can, I mean, if you want to include gender in that conversation, you can, or if not, you can do that as well. But talk to us about like what you've learned about leading as a technical director over the years that you've worked.
Yeah, no, and I hear you, sister. Like I am sometimes it's really hard because I mean they there's that book. It's like men are from Mars, women are from Venus, right? It's like it's true. Like men and women communicate really differently. But also I think depending on where you live and your upbringing and your personality, that also affects how people communicate differently. And I think like being leadership is all about communication, right? And that's like an easy kind of cop out, but it's really true. Like, so I've spent the last 20 years of my career working in a union shop, right? I've always had a IATSE staff. So I literally can't get anything done without my department, right? Like I'm not allowed to pick up a tool, right? So I need to engender their respect, their collaboration, their empathy, their willingness to jump on the bandwagon and like, hey, let's put on a play, right? So without them, I don't get anything done. So what I have found is that you really need to figure out how to communicate effectively. I'm still learning, even to this day. I'm still learning. That's a lifelong project. Talk about leadership. So right when I got to the Guthrie, I came there in '99, and Dan Cohane was the technical director. He's the guy who hired me. About 9 months after I got there, he left. It was not a good fit for him. He went to Sokoa. I mean, now, Dan's amazing. He's president of USITT now. He certainly has gone on to amazing things. But he left, and they didn't have a technical director to replace him. And so for 13 months, like Craig and I became co-acting technical directors of the Guthrie, and I was 26. And like, remember when I said I wanted to go somewhere and like learn from someone to mentor because I was really green, right? Like all of a sudden I had to be a leader, and I had to run this shop with Craig, my other ETD, like we had to run this, and I was in charge of people who literally had been working at the Guthrie maybe like my entire life. When I was like early on, I was like, well, I need to make all the decisions, and you have to do this because I'm telling you to do it, and I'm in charge. And it's like, oh my God, I could not have been more wrong. And it took me a while to learn, and I finally did that. Like sometimes in order to gain control of a situation, you actually need to let go, right? You need to let go. You need to trust in your staff. And the people you're working with, that like they've been hired to do this job. They absolutely can do it. Your job is to give them the information they need to do their job so that they can make it happen. And that sometimes sometimes the process is super important and needs to be specific, but often, again, I'm not allowed to pick up the tools. So if the carpenter or the painter or whoever's doing the work, they have a better idea of what the process should be for them, to get to the outcome that you're both mutually trying to achieve. Like, you need to let go and let them do their thing, right? Because you need to trust in them that they are working towards the same common goal, and that's going to happen. And I think once I learned that, that made me a much more effective leader. And especially because I was so young, right? That they were like, who is this little girl who's like trying to tell me what to do, right? Like, I've been doing this your whole life. And so it took me a while, and there were a couple of carpenters, man, we butted heads, and once we both kind of, or we all kind of came to the understanding that, like, we're all trying to move towards a common goal. And I learned that the more times I could say, here's the information, here's where I need you to go, like, here's the end point, go, you do it your way, right? And let them just do it their way without being so nitpicky, it made it much easier for those one or two times when I had to say, I know you really want to do it this way. I need you to trust me this time. I need you to do it my way. Like, and there's a reason, and maybe there's 17 reasons, and either A, I don't have time to go into them all right now, B, I can't remember them because I'm super stressed right now, right? Or C, like, just help me out on this one. Then those couple times when you need to kind of be like, no, because I'm asking you to, that's why, then they're willing to go there with you, and it doesn't feel like a power grab, just laying down the hammer just because you can. It's building up that trust. And to me, that's the key to leadership, is building up trust. And it's really hard because you make one mistake and it sets you back 6 months. It's really, really easy to lose trust and really, really hard to gain it. And even now, I still have a shop full of men. Now at CTC, my ATD is a woman named Kelly Pursley. It's great to have another woman in the shop. I'm super excited, and I believe in promoting women in the shop. And I did some research, some sort of, I don't know, loose research, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, and so I took the list of like LORT theaters in like groups 4, 5, and 6, which are like this sort of $5 million and bigger theaters, and googled I googled their staff lists, and I kind of did some pretty low key research, and I wrote down like the names of the technical directors and the ATDs at as many of the big theaters in those groups that I could find, because I was really curious. Like, I feel like I've been saying for a long time, I'm like one of the only female TDs in big regionals, but I didn't know for sure. And I looked it up, and out of the, like, I don't know, there were only like 10 or 11% of TDs in the largest regionals were women. And so I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not crazy. This really is true. But I'm excited to say, in the last 4 or 5 years, I do think that the needle is moving, and I'm super psyched. It's high time. It's high time, that because we're not going to get more women in the shop until we have more women in charge, until people feel like there are places where they're going to feel welcome. And shops have historically been filled with white men. That's a whole other topic of conversation. We have a gender problem, as big as a diversity problem, as well. I feel like in other areas, maybe the gender problem is the gender equity is a little different, but in the shop, it's moving now, but it's been slow.
I think it's so important not to take away jobs from other people, but just to get more perspectives and
Oh yeah.
more. That's how theater stays relevant, right? Because since we're
Yes.
storytellers, we need a bunch of different storytellers making the stories. And even if it is, being a carpenter or a painter, like we need that to keep our art relevant to the culture.
Yes. Yes. No, for sure. And you have to know sort of who you're working with in your shop. And again, my experience is largely in regional theater. I actually, a couple years, maybe a year and a half ago, I convinced all of the people in our shop. We all took personality tests. And this is even after we've been working together 10 years, and it was fascinating. And we shared the results. We had lunch, we got ice cream. Like, we all talked about, hey, listen, like, all the communication we're having, right? Like, there are a lot of things that layer on top of this that have nothing to do with the thing we're actually building on the shop floor, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
are you introverted or extroverted? How do you like to receive information? Are you a visual person? Are you a verbal person, right? Like, are you goal driven? Are you process driven? And it was a fantastic conversation to understand that, like, sometimes, look, I'm a New Yorker, okay? I talk loud, I talk fast, I talk with my hands a lot, okay? Like, I'm your quintessential New York Jew, right? Like, I just, I'm out there, I'm in your face, right? Well, in our shop, we've got a bunch of guys from the Midwest who are introverted and emotionally quiet. And I'm like super emotionally charged. And this was like, I could have a conversation with one of them and I'm just like excited about what I'm talking about. And I'm loud and I'm using my hands and blah, blah, blah. And I watch them like literally physically take a step back. And I'm like, oh God, no. Okay, Adriane, calm yourself, stop, bring your voice down, put your hands in your pockets, right? And they're getting freaked out. They're thinking, oh my God, she's angry. She's out of control. And I'm thinking, oh, they don't care about what I'm saying. Like, none of which is true, right? But it's just our communication styles are different. Making someone else understand you is not about, it's not their problem to understand you. It's your problem. If you don't understand what I said, that's not on you. That means I haven't explained it in a way that is useful to you yet. And that to me is like one of the super key things. I have a quote on my wall in my shop that I've had for a really long time, and I pulled it up on my computer because if I think of this, I'll say it right. It's by a French writer named Francois Garignon, and it says, between what I think I want to say, what I believe I'm saying, what I say, what you want to hear, what you believe you understand, and what you understand, there are at least 9 possibilities for misunderstanding.
Love that.
And like, that's it in a nutshell, right? Like, theater is a collaborative art. And whether I'm talking to a carpenter or a painter or a customer or a designer or a director or whomever, right? We've got to communicate, and we've got to make sure we're communicating in ways that we understand each other. That's to me where the heart of it all starts.
How does that translate when you're, like you mentioned, you're communicating with the director and the
Mm-hmm.
designers and the people in your shop? I would imagine that regardless of like personality, you're talking to director a little differently than you are your ATDs. So how do you navigate between those different people?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And the funny thing is, like, so I don't feel like I talk differently to different people in the process. I don't know. I am who I am. I wear my heart on my sleeve. Like, I'm not really good at hiding my emotions, which is probably why people in the Midwest think I'm nuts. um, but I will tell you, people in my department say that I do speak differently. So I must. Whether I perceive it or not, it must be true because other people are perceiving that. And so that's something I'm actually super conscious of, and I actively work on. And I'm not quite sure what they think is different, but it's definitely something I'm always thinking about. Look, I don't ever sort of say like, well, I'm in charge, and so that's why. But like, there are different power dynamics, right? Like, I work for the director, I work for the artistic director or the production manager, essentially, right? The carpenters in this shop essentially work for me, right? So there's a different just power dynamic, not whether you play into it or not. Like, I don't play into that, but there's a different level of what I'm allowed to propose and suggest, and what I'm allowed to make a decision on, whether I'm talking to a carpenter or I'm talking to a director. And so to me, that is where it all falls. And at CTC, we have something which we call the culture of yes. We don't say no right away to anything. And I've had designers tell me that is noticeable, and it's really different than other people, other places they work and other people they work with. I think TDs often get a bad rap for like, well, we're always the person who says no, and that no, you can't do that, right? No, you can't afford it. No, it's too expensive. No, it's too timely. It's whatever, right? And I don't do that, I guess. And so I never say no to a director. I never say no to a designer right away, even if I know it's never going to happen. It's too expensive, right? Or it's too time consuming, or it defies the laws of physics, or like like whatever the reason. I never say no right away, because immediately it's like shoop, you've ended the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And again, right, theater is a collaborative art form. So when you do that, it automatically puts the person you're talking to on the defensive. Well, why not? Why can't we do this? You're not working hard enough to solve this problem, right? I want to solve this problem, right? So we'll always say, let me do some research, right? Or I'm not sure, let me come back to you. You don't have to just say yes, right? You can say yes, but, right? Like, yes, we can do that, but we might not be able to do something else, right? Because our resources are finite. Or like, yes, we can do that, but we're not going to have it ready on time, or something like that. So creating a culture of yes makes designers and directors feel so supported, and it makes them feel like they are then free to really explore whatever it is they want to explore in the rehearsal process and the collaborative process. So I think a lot about that when I'm sort of managing up, right? Like when I'm trying to communicate with people who are sort of up on the food chain from me. But also, if a carpenter comes to me and they have a question or a comment or a concern about something, again, I never just want to say no, when I'm talking to them, because if they're coming to me with a concern, it means that something we've planned, has an issue and we need to address it. There's no such thing as a stupid question, in my opinion, right? I would so much rather that you come to me and you ask 3 more questions about whatever it is we're doing so that you feel comfortable and confident moving forward in the next step, than saying, oh God, I don't know what to do, I'm just going to choose something. And then, like, maybe it's not what needed to happen, or you use the material wrong, now we don't have enough, or like, again, it comes back to that, like, if you didn't understand something that we've been talking about, it's my problem. I haven't explained it in a way that you have the tools you need to do your job yet. I never want to say no. I never want to say stop asking questions. I can't stand people who do that. It makes me nuts.
Well, man, I wish more people in leadership positions had your outlook.
Oh God, thanks. Listen, we're like, at the end of the day, man, like, like when I was back in grad school, we used to say, like, it's just a school play, right? Like, when you think about it, the work we do, it's impelling and passionate and important. And, I like highly believe that the arts is imperative, God, especially now when the world is falling apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yes.
ultimately, like, it's not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. People aren't going to live and die if this wall is purple instead of blue, right? Or like, if this molding is not here, the audience isn't gonna know, right? So like, you have to really step back and be like, okay, right? Like, what's really important here, right? When we're doing this, it's that we're working together, we're creating some art that everybody feels supported and included, right? And like, and safe, right? At the end of the day, that, like, it's okay. It's just a school play. It's a really important play, but it's
Mm-hmm.
it's just a school play.
Yeah, that perspective is really important. I agree.
Mhm.
How do you prioritize what needs to get done? Do you have like a system for that? How do you decide, okay, all of my resources need to be over here and then they need to be over here? How do you prioritize tasks?
Yeah, no, and that's like, that is in a nutshell exactly what my job is, right? Is like, I prioritize work for other people, right? uh, I am like a classic type A list maker, box checker kind of girl. I love me a list with a box I can check off. Sometimes I write things down and make boxes even if I've done them, just so I can check them off.
Me too. Me too.
um, and so I guess that's the part of the process I really like, and I think that's something that you kind of need to have an innate sense, to be a good TD, is you have to be a logical thinker. My favorite parts of the process are thinking through step A, then step B, then step C, then step D. Like, sometimes we have a load in and we call it, this is like a very first pants, then shoes kind of load in, right? Like, you have to do step A before you do step B. Otherwise, you're going to screw yourself and you're going to put something in the way, or then the electricians can't reach it. And so, like, you have to be really logical about the steps in the process. That starts from, the beginning, when you get prelim designs, all the way to when you're actually loading it in on stage. And so it took me a long time, but I feel like now, after doing this for 20 years, like, I have a pretty good sense of how long it's going to take my shop to do something and how much it's going to cost my shop to do something. And again, like, this plays into just my personal preferences of, like, I'm the kind of person who actually doesn't like big seismic change. let me tell you, I'm really excited about the world right now, right? Like I like to kind of get in a place and figure out the systems and how things work and then live in it and incrementally, slowly just make it better and better and better over time, right? So over time, now like I've been able to say, okay, I can look at a design from the get-go and say, this is going to be around $500 and this is going to be 1,000 and this is going to take us a week and this is going to take us 3 or whatever it is. So that's something that I find just develops over time. And so now I'm better at doing that for, my staff and my shop. So that as we get into a show that I don't commit us to more than we can do. And so it starts at the beginning, right? Is making sure that, between time and money and labor, that you don't get yourself in trouble. The biggest times when I've been the most stressed out was when I didn't do that. A number of years ago, we did a production of Shrek. And it was Kate Sutton Johnson was the designer, and she's amazing, and her design was gorgeous, and it was big, and I loved it so much. And we got through the budget, and we were over budget, and I was like, I'll just figure it out. We'll make it happen. Oh my God, such a big mistake. Like I should have trusted my gut and gone back in and said, hey, listen, like we need to make some more changes here. I don't think we can do all of this. And we were like literally painting it until 5 o'clock opening night. Like it was so close. um, but trust your gut. The most trouble, like the most times I've ever gotten myself in trouble is when I was like, I don't know about this, but like, okay, we'll do it. And then I'll always say to myself, like, oh my God, Adriane, you knew this was not going to be the right decision. Why did you let someone talk you into this? So I think it's knowing to, it's that old adage, right? Good, fast, cheap, pick two, right? That works. That always still works in the shop as well. And so not biting off more than you can chew. And then once you've decided what you're going to do, I talk with my ATD and one of our carpenters sometimes is a carpenter drafter, as we're drafting things to figure out how to build them and come up with the technical design and before we put them on the shop floor. Not only are you figuring out like this is wood and this is steel and this is fabric and this framing goes here, you also have to answer the questions. How do we build this physically? Like, do we have enough space in our shop? Do we have the right tools or ways to set it up, right? How is the paint staff going to work with this, right? Do we need to do this part of the process and then give it to them so they can paint it before we assemble it back on the thing 20 feet in the air where they can't reach it, right? So talk about process, and also how do we load it in? If you haven't figured out those parts, you're not done with the technical design as far as I'm concerned, because it's all a big puzzle, right? And we all have to make sure that every tree fits in the forest with every other tree and that we know how we're going to put all the trees together. And so I make a lot of lists. And I give them to all the carpenters so that not only do they see their tree, but they also see the forest. So they know how their piece fits in with the larger picture. For every load in, I do a detailed plan of like literally every day. This is the hours, this is the staff. We're going to start with this. We're going to do this, and we adjust, right? As load in goes on, right? I mean, that's the thing, like a load in plan is great for about 10 minutes on day one, right? Because stuff changes, right? Like that's the one constant in theater is that like you're going to make all the best plans in the world in every department in every way, right? You're going to start with the costume design and start with the lighting design and start with the scenic design and the music and the script, right? And the actors and the blocking. Some of that or all of it is going to change, right? Between day one and opening night. And you have to be flexible enough and fit into your planning process contingencies to allow that to happen. That's what our field is. We never do the same thing twice. Sometimes people say, what do you do? I say, I make prototypes, right? Like I make one of everything because no guy wants what the last guy had on stage, right? Like they want some new shiny thing or whatever. The story is totally different, right? Like we're in Oz instead of in Whoville or, instead of in someone's dining room, right? Like the places we go are really different. So the ideas we use to plan them are the same, but the details are going to be different every time. And you need to be flexible enough to accommodate that because it's gonna come. Sometimes we spend weeks building something and they get it into tech and they're like, no, we don't like that. And then it ends up in the dumpster and you're devastated, but that's part of the process, like you just got to let it go and move on. Yeah, so I make a lot of lists, I guess. I make a lot of lists, and I think a lot about the process and the steps in the process, and I'm constantly refining them. I make a schedule for the carpenters so that everybody knows what their deadlines are. And I work really closely with our charge artist. Her name is Mary Novidvarsky, and she's amazing. She's been at CTC 30 years. She paints magical things. I am so blessed. Behind every good TD is an even better scenic artist. Without the scenic team, my department, our stuff is wood and concrete and whatever, plastic and foam, and they're the ones who make it look like magical places. And so we collaborate a lot, and we talk about what are her needs for her department, because some technical directors are in charge of paint. At CTC, I am not. She's her own department in her own right. I would never presume to tell her what to do, but I certainly love working with her and collaborating with her. And so we work together pretty closely to figure out what are the priorities. Does she have a big drop she needs to paint? Great, we're going to order that, get that on the floor for her first, so she can work on that while we build some hard scenery, and then she can paint some hard scenery while we build some more, or a lot of back and forth as we put things together.
Mm-hmm. While you were talking, I was
Yeah.
thinking about how much creativity is involved in your job. And I guess in my mind, I hear the word, technical director, and the first word that comes to my mind isn't creativity. um, but that sounds like you use a lot of creativity day to day.
I do. And it's not just my creativity. It's the creativity of everyone in the shop and everyone in the process. One of the most important things to know is like about, I think, working in theater is like, I don't know everything, right? Like nobody has all the answers, but I'm not afraid to ask. I know that I don't know everything, but I know who to go to find answers, or where to go, right? Now, gosh, the internet's an amazing place. There's no our research and development specifically for theater, or very little, because it's expensive, and who has that kind of funding or time? So we constantly take materials and things and that are out there for industry and use them in very non-traditional ways. I'll go down and talk to my master carpenter and be like, hey, listen, we need to do this thing, and I was kind of thinking about using like rollerblade wheels here, or whatever it is, right? Whatever and then we riff on it together. I love brainstorming sessions with carpenters, or our ATD, or the props master, or other people, because we're so much better when we work together. I know I'll have some ideas, but I won't have all the ideas, and I don't care if we use my idea. I just want to take the right idea for right now, right? The best idea for right now. I love a sexy solution to a complicated problem, and it's fun when everybody is solving it and thinking and working towards that, because then you get buy-in from people into the process when you do that, and we always come up with better stuff when we get more brains involved. That's what makes it fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why theater is so magical, I think, or one of the
Yes.
reasons it's so magical.
Yes.
So I have one final question I like to ask everyone, and that is advice to young people who want to do what you do.
Yeah, I guess don't be afraid to ask questions, right? Maybe I've said that before, is never be afraid to ask questions. Never feel like you have to know all the answers to be good at your job, right? Technology is constantly changing, and especially in our field, it's changing so fast that it's impossible to know everything. So don't be afraid to ask questions. I guess, when I was early starting out, I wish someone had sort of explained to me the different kinds of theater there are out there, right? Like commercial theater, or regional theater, or like, I mean, there's a whole world of educational theater, amazing universities and colleges doing great work, right? There's touring, that's a whole right thing. There's opera, there's like community theater, dinner theater, right? There's so many different ways to do theater in our world. Well, when we can do theater in our world
Yeah.
someday. Um, we all put on plays, but we do it in a slightly different process. And so learn what it is about the process that you like, to find the right niche of theater to pursue. Working in a commercial shop like Hudson or whatever, is like a really different experience than working in a regional theater, is a really different experience than being a university technical director. All of those, you're doing great theater, you're, putting on, fun stuff, you're working with cool people, but those are three very different scenarios. And I didn't learn about that until grad school. So I'm always super interested in telling younger, people who are getting into this, like, hey, there's lots of different ways, and figure out what it is. For me, I wanted to be somewhere, be in the same building where I could know all the measurements and know all the people, and that wouldn't change, but the artists who came through would change, which was the regional model. So I like to share that. I guess also, like, for a long time, I kind of believe there's two different kind of technical directors out there. There are technical directors and there are technical directors, right? Like, it's a continuum. Some people are like math head gear motor people who know structures and math and a million materials, the properties of them, and they're super technical, right? And there are some people who are true on directors. They are organizer, list maker, box checker, people. I am a technical director, right? Like, I'm a director. I like the process and organizing. I know a lot of technical stuff. Okay, I've learned over the years, and certainly enough to hold my own and be able to come up with safe solutions and structural things that are going to make the actors feel safe. I mean, that's the most important thing, is safety, right? Like, if the actors don't feel safe, and the crew and the cast of the orchestra, right? Like, if you guys don't feel safe, you can't do what you need to do during the show, right? Which is make beautiful music and sing songs and do your blocking, right? So I know enough to do all that, but I'm a director at heart. And I think early on, I was always very nervous that that was not okay, that I had to be a gearhead to be okay as a TD. And that's not true. It's okay to play to one of those strengths or the other. You can absolutely be successful. And different situations call for different needs in either one of those areas. So it's like, are you a technical or are you a director? Figure that out and embrace it. I know that was when I finally said, you know what, I'm a director, and that's okay. It allowed me to really kind of move forward and continue to grow in a great way. I guess the last thing is, like, look, theater is amazing, and people who do theater are passionate, and we don't do this to make a lot of money, right? Like, we do it because it feeds us and because we're driven to do it. You should love your job and you should work really hard at your job, but it's also your job. I've seen so many people who get really burned out because theater is their life. Don't make it your life. Come to work, be passionate about your work, but at the end of the day, go home and enjoy your life. That love your job, but also know that it's not the only thing out there. Take time to step away from your work, so that you don't get burnt out, so that you can stay healthy, because that's going to make you more productive when you are at work. I feel very lucky that I've been able to do that. I hope to work in this field a long time to come.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Zach Rimbold.